I know Lisa's gonna join in, I don't know, 20 minutes or so, but I think she's gonna be remote, so.
That's all of us, isn't it?
How do I reach you if I need to? I've got your city number through the switchboard, which is in next to use, but is there cell if I'm on my way here and get held up? or
Oh,
something?
sure, we don't have a city cell phone, but I will give you my number, but I'm not gonna read it out in the, public meeting. Yeah, let me write it out.
So where are you coming from? From
Denver.
Denver?
Yeah.
Live in Washington Park.
West Park, yeah, I live in Park Hill. So
Well, that's right, it was, Andy told me.
Yeah.
You did.
yeah, we're kind of neighbors, yeah, and it's, yeah, thanks.
Don't wanna read it out.
No, it's,
Some of us do it.
I need to remember that. You have a sharp elbow to remind me that we're on camera, you can give me a shot, you know. Good.
All right, well, so Mike, you are acting as chair tonight, so I think we just need to call to order and then we just hop right in.
Okay, do we do a roll call?
Since it's just a work session, we don't need to have a roll call.
So we're not gonna have minutes?
Nope, we don't have to approve minutes or anything.
Okay, so call to order, and the first item is to basically talk about the Saving Places Conference. So if anyone has things they'd like to mention about the conference, things they like, things they didn't like, any comments?
The other thing I thought could be interesting, Maria was supposed to attend and she kind of thought, well, you know, is there anything that we can like take from the conference and then apply here? You know, is there anything that sprung to mind? Kind of like, oh, that would be an interesting project to undertake or sort of advise the city to look into, that sort of thing. I couldn't immediately think of anything, but
I know we talked about this before, but putting that historic survey plan that lists out every house, putting that online somehow, because I definitely showed people information from it before, like, oh, wow, that's really cool. So I think we have discussed it before, I just can't remember.
right, I definitely have, and
There were a bunch of us in the session on housing. Is the city looking at any more housing projects?
as in like, actual development.
Well,
or-
either like what was done on Colorado or its involvement with the project at the football field, is it?
Hmm. Well, there's a few projects going on housing wise that obviously aren't tied to historic preservation necessarily, but some potentially could be. So the field house project on the old football field, that's all entitled and has building permits. It's being built at the moment, 119 units ranging from studios to a few 4 bedrooms.
And the city owns or a portion?
No, there was a time when they were working on trying to do some deed restrictions essentially, so that they'd be captured in perpetuity at a certain AMI income level, but it ultimately was not. It didn't work out. There are a few of the units that are dedicated to the school district. It's only maybe 5% of the units, something like that. But that was an agreement as part of the sale because the school district used to own that site. We have a project, well, we just bought property adjacent to the cemetery. It's about an acre, or actually it's about 2 acres. It's just up 103, about a half mile. And as part of the sale, we've agreed to build senior housing on that site. And so we will be working towards building senior housing on that site. And I don't know quite if it'll be like assisted housing or if it'll be just kind of like 55 or 60 plus or whatever it ultimately works out to be. But there's a firm, EV Studio, who kind of did a conceptual plan of all city properties. And on that one, they said, well, meeting density and parking and all this, we probably could fit 40, 50 units if you went higher density. And so that's going to be officially annexed into the city and hopefully zoned at the next council meeting.
Okay, well, so along the lines of that, there wasn't any presentation on it, but something along the lines of both a tax credit and rehab grant type of program, which also involves a public information component. That's been done in previous conferences, but not, I don't think they did that in this one. But that would be something that could be beneficial. And whether you sort of targeted to the fact, there were literally hundreds of historic period houses in the city. And as much as anything, it's like a fix-up program.
Oh,
It could be
sure.
done, so the fix-up part is basically, it's painting and weatherization. And then the tax credit is a way of someone getting reimbursed for money they spent on it. And there's both historic tax credits, and then depending upon the income involved, there would be the low income housing tax credit.
Right, for the historic credits. Obviously, we have the survey plan that says, here's the hundred, the things that are within our period of significance, and it still has the integrity of all of this. But it's not, obviously, we don't have residential historic districts, and we don't really have any listed.
Although we've discussed with the survey that was done, I think the first primary location, what was it, Colorado? Was it West Colorado? Was the location that was selected as the first priority in terms of looking at a new district?
Yeah.
And there are certainly a lot of not just houses, but other historic buildings
Right,
along West Colorado. And I guess that sort of, again, it wasn't discussed at this conference, but again, the idea of that survey, that was, I think, the first priority was to, like, there were 7 objectives from that plan or that survey. And the first one was to do a survey of an intensive survey of another district, potential district.
true. And that's. Well, that theory doesn't seem to be working. This plan, which is on our site, but I would like to make much more user friendly. This, and I know, Clark, I sent you a copy, is that right? Yep.
I've got a binder for it.
Yeah,
So.
there's a lot in here. I mean,
It's like,
multi-year work plan.
and the directory of all properties is 40 or 50 pages long.
Right, right. Yep. Just coming on Colorado, heading up to the city hall here, you see that whole series of small residential buildings and then vacant lots. And then there's some new development that's happened in there. Is that zone for more higher density, backs up on the highway?
Are you talking about on
That
that?
way,
that
yeah,
way.
on the
Yeah, it
south
largely,
side.
on Colorado Boulevard, we've created this overlay district, called the East End Overlay District. It's basically from the creek to Minor Street, which is just one
Right.
street south.
Right.
And so within that whole area, basically from the visitor center east, you can get sort of density bonuses and setback reductions and height bonuses in places to kind of promote or encourage redevelopment at a higher density or
redevelopment.
kind of mixed use and that kind of,
Right.
that sort of thing.
Yeah, there are some of those, small vernacular, very small houses, a little bigger than the cribs, but not much, on that south side of the streets, just sprinkled, a few of them.
And actually, there's a lot of those in other parts of the city as well.
Right, exactly.
Right, and it's on this page here, this 24th page, that kind of identified this potential neighborhood residential historic or NRHD. That was surveyed, it's just up here, so that's kind of that western Colorado Boulevard, exactly like you said.
And it's sort of logical because it's an extension, because it actually is adjacent to downtown.
Right, because essentially this whole area, which you can
And
see as well as this.
Isn't there like at least one church in there that's listed?
Along
There's
this,
Baptist church in there.
like north of Colorado Boulevard in that yellow, on the right side, there's two churches actually, identified here. But I think there might actually be three churches. I just,
There's the Catholic Church, which is, I don't think is historic.
right, that's the one on the very far right, just on the edge of this proposed district, but then
But
there's
the
that,
next one is.
it's, there's the nationally registered former church, which is now the radio station, but then next to that one is the, I think it's an evangelical, it's that green and white building.
And there's one around Ninth Street.
Yeah, there's one that's kind of up the hill a little bit.
Right, it's kind of like an adobe.
Yeah, that's a Catholic and really strict Catholic views. I can't remember.
The
which-
inside
The
of that.
one with like
building
the,
is
like the
really
clear
beautiful.
ceiling tiles on it?
Orthodox, yeah,
Oh, okay.
yeah, it's kind of up,
Yeah.
Just to get a set, I might as well. pull
And
it.
it's, the thing about it is, that is a different category, that I believe is treated as a planning grant,
Hmm.
which is easier, in some ways easier to get. And it comes it's in a different pot of money.
Right, so we would have to
yeah, that one.
designate the
Yeah.
district essentially, right?
Very
And
Spanish
then-
looking.
Or designate individual buildings.
Well,
for
or
them
could
to
be,
eligible.
this would just be, it's a more intense survey, but that's a good question. We have to designate the district first before getting money for a survey. I mean, typically the State Historic Fund wants it to be designated before you do it or in process. So yeah, I think you're right, is that it would require a designation before getting money for a survey.
But then the process would theoretically be, I suppose, get the surveys to kind of determine the historic.
Yeah, to determine which,
and then
which property.
from there, those properties would be eligible for the reimbursement program. Is that right?
Yes. Although it wouldn't have to be even done within a historic program, it could be just that weatherization program, basically a fix-up for small houses. Because
Right,
basically, you're sort of saying you're targeting a lower income group to where people who are living in a small house, you're making it available for them to get assistance in fixing the house up. With the main goal being make it look nicer and weatherize it, which then helps with energy bills, which are only gonna get worse.
So outside improvements to the building.
I know Lisa has said, because this is when we kind of talked about it previously. Because I know she's brought it up, at least to me privately, is that part of the benefit of doing the historic neighborhood district would be to open them up for these sorts of programs. So she was quite interested in, having done some restoration work on a few of the historic homes in town. But then, of course, her other benefit would be just, now we've kind of protected these buildings with this
Right.
additional. So yeah, with this kind of, this building, the interior of this church here is really, really nice. It's like all exposed, really, really nice. But
The
then this,
Spanish one,
yeah,
the Orthodox
exactly.
Catholic.
Then of course, there's this one, which I think, if I recall, is already listed at some level. I can look at that, but then there's of course this church, which is on the National Historic
Yeah.
Register, which is no longer a church, it's now our KYGT radio station. And they host the
Say
concerts
Pago.
inside, but
There you go.
right. That's right, so anyway.
Has there been any request or interest from any property owners asking about if there's funding available to take care of historic properties or any discussion in town?
Well, I don't know that there's been any particular requests from residential property owners. Certainly there have been for some of the commercial buildings, but I know, again, I think Lisa has said that she's talked to some folks who are interested in the program, you know, for like window replacements and weatherization and that sort of thing, but
Right.
we've not gone that far with it. I think there could potentially be, if we don't give people very good information about it, pushback of, well, we're going to be, now we have rights limitations on our home, but
Right.
one thing, which is our kind of the third listed topic, but they all sort of blend together, I think tonight, is about the comprehensive plan for the city. One of the elements of our comprehensive plan is the historic element, and the comprehensive plan is going to be kicking off next March, this March, next month. And so obviously, the comprehensive plan deals with everything, open space and environment and housing and land use broadly, but we do have quite a significant historic element, and I think it could be really beneficial to push to get feedback about this exact topic.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people in town that it would be good for, don't think it's good for them because they've never heard anything good about being in a historic district. And that's just a matter of education. You just need to
Right.
teach them that this is good for you and it's good for the town. And, you know, because they're so afraid that they're gonna be restricted on everything they wanna do to their house.
Right.
Like
Well,
plant a
that-
tree.
A bunch of rules and
And
everything.
the other
That's
thing is, it could be made in that sense of voluntary program. Where you're basically, you're offering incentive, you participated, yes, you'll need to preserve certain aspects of the house, but it makes money available to you.
Right.
And in whether or not you participate is up to you.
Yeah, that business of encouraging property owners to really think about this and what the trade-off is for supporting the idea of the historic district is, I think, the key to having good success over the years. So there is a lot of fear, which is, you know, you can understand, people don't want to be regulated, and I get that, but there's also that idea that the whole quality and character of the community gets preserved, and that's good for all.
Right.
There was, people used to say that, oh, it's gonna hurt my property values, nobody's gonna wanna buy the house. Well, it turns out that property values are essentially enhanced by being in a designated district because there's certainty about what will happen in the future, more certainty. So that whole thing of education, there are the two prongs. There's the identification of districts, of which I think there are several here probably that could be done. And then there's the education and figuring out, you know, where and how to build support for it to get it to go forward. The process of designation is done just by the city council here, right? After notice and public hearing and
Yeah, we
study and
could,
discussion and so on.
And most places I'll work on the basis if there is a majority of property owners who are in favor of doing it.
Right,
right,
Yeah.
well, yeah, and the process, I guess, at least for local designation, would be as simple as petitioning, if you will, the
yeah, or an ordinance.
city council.
Yeah, at a local level, you can essentially do what you wanna do.
And that at least would get us, I believe it would at least make folks eligible for state funding at that point. It maybe could get federal level grants, but.
Yeah, actually, with what's going on in Washington now, it's the, I don't know how much you're aware. There's basically two organizations within the federal government. There's the National Park Service under the Secretary of Interior, and there's something called the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation. Last year, the ACHP made a pretty major decision that it was going in the direction of DEI as one of its priorities. And the Park Service was looking at it and sort of collecting comments. So basically, the agencies were going in the opposite direction of what the policy is now.
Right,
So it's very hard to say what's gonna be happening at the federal level now.
right,
And it is, the advisory council as an independent federal agency is that species of creature that's really it's under the microscope right now. It's gonna be looked at very hard.
And I would assume the chairwoman's gonna be replaced, because she was very strong on DEI.
So,
Matter of time, I guess, then.
yeah. Yeah, that's gonna be different. The good thing is that the state has its own source of funding for,
Yeah, this is
Preservation.
probably the best state in the country in terms of having dedicated revenue.
So because of the gambling,
pretty good.
Yes, because of
regulating.
the free gaming communities,
Yeah.
which is separate from the Native American casinos.
I wanted to ask if there is funding through the county that's from gaming revenues, that's a potential or not.
County is struggling right now.
Well, and we don't have any, I don't know of any gaming in the county.
It's all
It's all in
Gilpin.
Gilpin.
It's all
yeah.
Gilpin. Yeah,
There was,
I think that's right. Yeah, right.
there was something about, at the very beginning, because I was in Teller County, which has one of the towns, which is Cripple Creek. And there was something about counties that were impacted, but I don't know if that was still there and whether or not. Is there an actual impact to Clear Creek County from what's going on in Gilpin County?
Right,
But
well,
I don't know, I have not heard about that aspect in years,
sure.
as to whether or not there's still money there.
Well, I know we've gotten quite a few awards from gambling monies for GoCo, the like outdoor recreation grants. The existing park playground at Cedar Street Park, for example, was funded with that.
Yeah.
And a number of the, or at least one of the trails in the park behind the arbor now. is
That's the-
funded with that.
That's the lottery.
Oh, right,
Those are
right,
lottery
right, it's not
dollars
the
for
game.
that.
But
Yeah.
I think that at this point, probably the county's in financial trouble because, is it because of the mine that they're,
Yeah,
in other words, they're looking at significant budget cuts.
Even
Yeah,
right now,
correct.
because they were balancing, my understanding is they go back certain years and they take an average of those certain years and that's what we got. But now the very great years are off.
Mhm.
So they just have puny years to come up with their average, so we're not getting the money that.
And it's not looking good going forward. I just wanted to
yeah,
raise
the
that.
county,
ask
that's
that, so.
because the Henderson mine, which is, just outside of Empire, is at some point closing. It's closer and closer with each day.
It's been almost closing for many years.
Yeah, but
It's
they,
been almost closing since I've moved up
I
here.
believe that they already are using like reserve funding to run services for the county. Like they have a budget shortfall every year, so while I think we are in a much different position, but obviously then we can't quite rely on the county for support in that.
Right.
Monetarily, at least.
It's, and you'll know the tenor much better than I here, but it's the whole residential fabric of the city here, as well as the Minor Street, the downtown stuff and all of that. Is that whole thing considered to be, this is our historic town and this is what we really feel good about, or is it more thinking about, well, it's the mills and the commercial area?
Well, I really think that a large portion of the town has lived here for quite a long time, and I think historic preservation is an incredibly important layer of the city's character. And so if folks came in and started trying to scrape some of these historic homes that were built, in the early 1900s, there would definitely be pushback in town.
See, it strikes me that given the huge housing issues in the ski, base lodge towns,
Mm.
and there's more and more pressure, isn't there, for even here for affordable housing for people who work up the hill.
Which is why there's no motel rooms.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, the big, so another kind of complicating factor that there's like three things kind of working all at the same time. And when it comes to housing, as we had a grant for a consultant to kind of audit all of the housing codes for the various municipalities in the county. And so for us, everyone had recommendations, but one of the big recommendations that was seen as kind of like a small lift for the city to do that wouldn't really cost us anything would be to basically upzone R1, which is residential single family, and R2, which is single family and duplex, to allow triplexes or fourplexes and the like. And so in one sense, you say, well, certainly there's some property owners who'd be willing to scrape their single family and build a duplex or triplex. Others probably wouldn't because the home is more valuable than, you know, than to scrape it. But I think there would be some pushback from people who live in our neighborhoods, because even beyond just not wanting more people living in these tight spaces, I think they also would be concerned about some of the character of the old homes.
Well, it is also, you've got like on Virginia, there's no place to park.
Right.
So in other words, it's, there's areas that although the zoning might allow it, physically, it wouldn't work until the value of the property is much higher.
I won't even drive my truck up there.
Yeah. But one thing I wanna mention, that, and this was sort of one of the main takeaways I had from the Telluride. The biggest problem Telluride has is the zoning for where most of the houses, historic houses are, allows buildings that are 4 to 5 times as large. And they've never been able to address that. And so eventually it all gets converted to McMansions, in terms of where the residential neighborhoods are. Because the land is so valuable now. And so that's a very strong reason not to upzone anything.
Right.
Because that makes it possible, that really increases the incentive to start tearing houses down.
Mhm.
So unless there's a strong protective mechanism.
And the
It's not
zoning
the other
is
side.
zoning is one way of doing that, is saying the zoning only allows so much.
Right.
Mhm. Well, and I will say I would say pretty consistently, where we have single family zoning is where we have historic homes or homes from the period. Like that whole Colorado, western Colorado is all R1. Everything in the Sunnyside neighborhood, which is kind of just west of the Argo Mill, is R1. Where you see the multifamily is like south of Colorado Boulevard, kind of consistently throughout the city.
But the thing though, that could be done though is sort of targeting, and for example, if what was allowed was an ADU, and that's kind of in the zoning already.
Right.
And basically it's a detached structure of a certain size. That would have the least impact because you're talking about structures that are compatible with the size of what's there.
Yeah, that's true.
And
because-
so if there winds up someday being serious pressure from the state, something like that would be the way to go, as opposed to just saying, okay, it's now the equivalent of R2 or R3 density.
Yeah, well, and the planning commission has talked about wanting to encourage or open up the code to more ADUs. They haven't talked quite as much about whether density is a solution, but I think they've generally been supportive of if people can fit a small ADU. Right now, the code says that in like R1 and R2 and R3, you can have an ADU, but it can be at most 50% of the floor area of your primary residence.
Primary.
And you have to be able to provide off-street parking.
So the motto was just passed recently?
No, that the ADU or allowance has been in place for,
Before I was here.
yeah, quite a few years. But
Has it been used?
we have some ADUs, certainly. We don't have as many as you might expect, but we don't really have any incentives for them. For example, if you're building a detached structure right now, you have to pay for sewer and water tap fees that are separate from your home. Now you're looking at $20,000 on top of construction costs and all of that.
Get started.
Okay, well, maybe to get back to the conference, anything else, any other observations about the conference? Any other particular sessions that you liked?
It seemed like a swan song, given the change in focus in the federal administration and this idea of inclusiveness and the, intangible cultural preservation. All of that was, strong diversity, strong, communities that have not had voices previously. Those voices were at the conference. At the same time, it was the month of change kind of to a new style and, I think it's important to pay attention to what the history of the community is and have that be the bedrock and the base. And to study that. I mean, I think there's pretty rich history here in this town of, workers coming and, different ethnic groups here at different times and, some conflict, some cooperation and, an enduring community. So that's that's sort of a good bedrock in some of those context studies that were called out here in the preservation plan. Maybe might, if they're studied further, we find ways to encourage that, which would cause more attention. It strikes me generally that a residential preservation plan that looks at saving the housing stock here, the historic housing stock in town, that would be a good basis to get in place now, because I think change is coming. There'll be a push for higher density, more density replacement. And I think the community needs to decide whether they really do want to be replaced or whether they want to see it preserved, which I certainly would like to see as a citizen of, larger community in Colorado, but I think it would benefit everybody to have Idaho Springs staying, Idaho Springs have maintained its character. But getting the property owners to see the value of that and understand it and feel proud about it and all is I think, front end job here in establishing the residential district.
So along those lines, did I send you that communication guide from NEPC? I think I did, but I'm not sure. It's basically, it's National Alliance of Preservation Commissions. In other words, it's the organization that does exactly what we do. They, a year ago, came out with one of the best guides on how do you communicate with anybody that has a relationship to historic preservation. It's about 80 pages long. It's really well done. But it's a complete communication strategy is what they have. Not just a strategy, but it's really the methods of, it gets into specifically, if you're talking to realtors, this is what they're interested in.
That was the
Right.
messaging guide, right?
Yeah, I think it's called the messaging guide.
Yep, I do have it and I'm happy to send it.
Please.
I'd like to see it too.
I've not
Sure
dug
you
in,
throw it at Lisa.
of course, I haven't dug in as much as I perhaps should, but I do know it has the developer, it has elected official, it has colleagues and.
I think part of our problem in Idaho Springs too is the generations. Like the older generation, they're like, no, we're not gonna follow your stupid rules, we wanna stay the way we are. And the younger generation is like, oh yeah, maybe we'll do that because we want it to be nice, that's why we moved up here. So I think those two aspects clash. And that's where a lot of our
Right.
problems.
Yeah, and
The older generation just is like totally like this. And as we've seen historically, a lot of people don't pay attention until something has already happened and then, oh wow, now it affects me. And that's one thing that we really need to work on is getting them to pay attention and understand before it actually affects them and pisses them off.
Like the
Yeah.
football fields, housing, a lot of people are sad to lose that for a number of
Right, and I was
reasons.
actually driving by there, cause like I'm a flyby now, I come from downtown and I just go home. In fact, I missed the first exit to get here. I think a lot of people. I just lost my train of thought.
Well,
Oh, yeah, I drove by the football field and it's getting to the point now where you can't see the houses behind it. So I was.
And you won't, it's done.
Right, and I was a little disappointed about that because even though I knew that was gonna happen, when you actually see it, it's like, oh, no, I can't see the tiniest house in Idaho Springs anymore. So I think that is a stressor for a lot of people too.
And that is a wonderful source of energy for the work of preservation, that felt sense of loss in the community that they've known. And older folks, older generation, me or older, but who've had the property handed down for a couple of generations. One of the arguments in communicating is, well, would you like to see this? Saved, would you like to have it, see it go forward, being preserved for, in future generations? Would it be better or worse if your family's home were still here and people were still using it? And
Yeah,
so working that angle.
I do think the appetite for preservation is increasing because of like the football field project, but also, I don't know if, did any of you attend that event at Carlson the old Carlson Elementary? It was like an open house sort of thing. Because the building, it's not a historic building, it's from like it replaced a historic building that's no longer there, but it's from like the outside of our period of significance. It's older than 50 years, but I don't know whether it would really show us any level of integrity. Maybe it would, maybe it wouldn't, but
It does represent a particular style, and it's one of the few buildings of that style in the city.
right, certainly in the city, it's the most notable example. And I think at that meeting, there was a kind of a sense of loss of saying, well, we have an understanding that this could be scraped because it's kind of a gateway to Minor Street, and someone likely, if it's on set, if someone buys it for $4 million, there's $5 million, they're probably not going to do an adaptive reuse of a elementary school building. They're probably going to want to do like a larger mixed use development and
Although converting it to housing is a possibility.
and there have been a few housing developers who do like LIHTC sort of funding sources have acquired, probably for $4 million. They might not be able to make it work, but if it dropped a little bit, then they could do that adaptive reuse, put in affordable housing and do maybe a mix of market rate as well. But then, then the balance with that is the city's losing out on the potential for more commercial development right there. If you did like a first floor commercial, second story residential, but so I think, given that people are seeing changes in town, things are going to continue to change. The East End, as you pointed out, Clark, is ripe for redevelopment as the gondola comes in at the Argo and all that. I think there could be opportunity where people say, we do want to preserve this character where we can.
So one of the questions that is who are the troops, who are the cheerleaders, who are the platoon leaders, that from the residential historic areas who would want to lead? Are there thought leaders in the community, folks who are concerned about the changes that are happening and want to see that preservation is part of the future of Idaho Springs, who would want to, and who have influence with their neighbors? Are there folks like that who can be drafted?
There actually is a book on how to create a historic district. It's fairly old now, but I think most of it's still relevant, and it's very much written from a political perspective. In other words, it's written from the perspective as we want this, how do we get it done?
Connecticut, where I started my preservation career, state laws set up a process for localities, the 169 towns in Connecticut to set up historic districts. And it required it, before the ordinance was presented to the Board of Selectmen or the City Council, it required a 2/3 approval of the property owners in a formal vote. And that meant that all of the education and coalition building, everything had to be done at the front end. They didn't all pass. They didn't all get to the 2/3, but most did. And then the ones who got in, were created. They have not been disestablished since. They've continued. And there was a lot. The Historic District Commission started with a lot of support from the community for that going forward. So I'm not suggesting that as a process here. It doesn't. It was town governments, a different system back in New England, but, that idea of doing the education at the front end, I think really does, and politicking, if you call it, or education and marshaling of all the resources ahead of time, availability of funding for, things. I'm sure there are foundation problems. Every old house I owned had a foundation problem.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Those
none of
are the
them are
kinds of
level.
things that- Yeah, not are level, yeah, exactly right. So,
Today, as we move to the second topic, which is the work plan for 2025. What is it as a board we're interested in doing this year? Besides review the few applications that we probably will see.
And of course, the big lift last year was updating the guidelines, so,
Has that been adopted or it hasn't?
yep, and we've not used them yet for any projects, but,
And they are stronger than what was there before.
Yeah.
More specific, yeah, it's good.
it's a wonderful piece of work. I think it's a good, really good way of, looking forward to.
A lot of shoulds were changed to shall.
It's-
yeah.
Más fuerte.
Well, I think the key thing that we knew was, right now at least, we only have 60 to 70 something structures in the historic district that we kind of certainly already have preservation guidelines on, but we need to strengthen it. And as people come in and make more investments, we kind of saw it with the Opera House project is, people are gonna start pushing for more and more to kind of fit their vision into the space rather than fitting their vision around the space.
Is anything happening with that right now or?
They, I think are getting close to pulling building permits, but they've been working on internal remediation stuff. They actually found, and I don't think it's private knowledge or anything, but they're working on trying to figure out an internal elevator option. One of the big discussion items was covering the back of that building with like an elevator complex or.
It seemed like it just wasn't gonna fit in the space.
Yeah,
I think don't quote me on this, but I think originally they wanted to excavate out the whole lower level, like and go below grade. And I'm of the understanding that through the water table and some other issues, they might
I'd
not be
say, yeah, I
able to
thought
do
they
that,
get water.
which, led to a different circumstance where they might be able to get kind of like a personal elevator inside.
That's really the only person that needs an elevator, right?
Yeah, I think the idea originally was.
They're gonna have the studio in the basement though, so they would be doing a lot of going down.
Right, but if they're no longer able to do that, then they say, well, now I don't need a commercial size elevator and can have more flexibility. So-
Yeah, no, they could do a lift and that's becoming very common at houses.
Yeah, they were looking at like a Lula sort of design, but I guess they needed to be taller than what a typical Lula is allowed to be. I don't know what Lula stands for, I can't remember, but it's like a personal lift sort of thing.
I thought it was
Anyway.
clothing.
Well, in terms of some things mentioned, on a very simple level, there's the buffer zone. And it would be good to better define exactly what is required in the buffer zone. And there's just a statement in terms of compatibility. And there's been a couple of projects in the buffer zone. But to better define that, because in effect, that doubles the size of the district without actually expanding the district. There's already a regulation that says in the buffer zone, you have to be compatible with downtown.
Right, that's a great point, I think, because there has been concern about ensuring that that is well protected. And is going to become relevant with if it's redeveloped to a school building project especially. And yeah, just for your reference, we require that a 2-block radius outside of the district be compatible with the architectural features of our historic district. So
Right.
even if you're outside of the district, you at least need to use historic styles and materials.
And that literally more than doubles the area that we're talking about.
Right, I think where it kind of, it doesn't clearly define that area, you know, a 2 block radius, you're like, well, like on this east end here, you kind of say, well, how,
Does it say radius? I thought it was just 2 blocks.
it says new developments within a 2 block radius
Okay,
of
that's
the
the
outside
radius.
boundary. So I was trying to make a map that shows it, and then maybe you have a better idea of how to
Buffer.
do it.
Yeah, if you
but
get a
You
buffer,
can do a
but-
buffer.
How do you
buffer
do
map.
a 2 block buffer?
you pick the distance and.
Yeah, but it might vary, like it might have to be,
Yeah. Cause there's certain, like, when you go east or
to
when
add
you
or
go
something.
north,
The blocks are different
it's
sizes.
a little clear. It's clear because you kind of have the avenues and
And you
streets,
might have to
but
just
when you
hand
go.
edit it.
Well, you have to have a different buffer for the west, the east, and the north,
Right.
because of the size of the blocks.
I
It's
had,
not even,
That might, you were right, that might serve to be better defined, because if it's subject to argument, it will be argued at some point. Who knows what,
And I don't know if you know 1800 Colorado, that was the one building I reviewed that was within the buffer, and the main thing I was able to get them to do was to use brick instead of what they were going to use. Forget what they were planning on using,
yeah,
but it looked completely out of character, and I convinced them, and they were gonna do a brick that looked very much like tile, and I convinced them to do stone.
oh, yeah.
But one of the things that worked with them, is I wrote up something specifically for them. And then I gave them example, yes, that building,
Oh.
is that when they resurfaced it, you can't see from this distance, but they were gonna do something that looked like tile for the outside walls, and I was able to convince them to go to a slightly rusticated stone,
ah,
which they actually rather liked. But I actually created basically like a flyer page that explained to them, sort of, here's examples in town you can go look at. What are the stone buildings and what kind of stone it is? And then examples of where you can find those types of stones. So that was the main thing I was able to get out of it. But basically, it was the time of putting together the information for them to make it easier for them to understand, this is the character, these are the materials, this is what you could do.
right?
So perhaps a project would be to put that together kind of as a broad thing to say like, hey, you know, someone comes in with a project, they're like, we're not in the historic district, and we could say, but you're in this buffer, and so here's this informational pamphlet brochure sort of fact sheet that, you know, says you want to do a stone building, here's some of the examples, the brick building, et cetera. I think that would be an interesting.
So how much of a proposed first residential district would be within the buffer? So, any of it? some of
At least a half a dozen blocks, if you wanna go back to that map.
Yes, I will do that. Give me just, not too far from the next scroll a little. Share my screen again. And this will
We're all
go.
looking to see.
Yeah. No. Got it, okay. So. If you look at, whoops. Okay, it's about as much as I can do today. So the end of the historic district is right where the library book is, because that's the library. This large parcel here is the school, that large building. So I think that whole north, like going directly north of the historic district, that whole area is already buffer. If going west, you know, the buffer, I guess, would go until maybe 11th or 12th.
And on the north side of Colorado, there actually are a lot of little houses.
Right,
And that's basically, that's only showing the equivalent of 1 block from the center, so actually. The distance we're talking about is, if you go from Colorado to the purple line above it, that's only a quarter of 2 blocks. In other words, pretty much all the housing up to the hillside, all the housing going up the hillside would be within the buffer. That's not more than 2 blocks away from the library.
right, and that would essentially be all the way up to
So we're
11th.
we're talking about dozens of houses that would fall within there, I
So-
think.
Everything, yeah.
So part of the lift is is done in a sense. The property owners are within the buffer. What they do to the exterior has got to be taken into account the historic character of the historic district, right?
Mhm.
But they may or may not be eligible for the rehabilitation funding if they're,
Right,
if
yeah,
there's a good designated historic district contributing building.
yeah,
So now, suppose there's a residential district that includes them, that is, in some of these places, it's gonna be pretty much the same boundary, isn't it, on the edge? So then, now you've got the advantage of having a source of funding that can help underwrite the cost of a rehabilitation fund.
And again, and what that map is not showing is there are a lot of small houses along Virginia, which is the next street
right.
North.
Yeah, this will.
from Colorado.
This is
Oh,
a
Virginia,
sense
right,
of,
yeah.
you know, this whole
Yeah.
Virginia stretch.
Very historic, yeah.
Pretty much everything all the way down Virginia Street with only a few exceptions.
The retaining walls are all property owner responsibilities. That's another thing, those are, they're continuing responsibility to maintain, right, to keep them from coming down.
And another problem up there is flooding. Just drainage running off.
Right.
Those problems do have on their north side, do have a problem with drainage. And another topic I was gonna mention, and this was from reading the plan, the comprehensive plan, is that we need to sort of integrate archaeology into the topic, because it's built in when you're, for example, if you're doing a project with grant money, you pretty much have to take into account, does the excavation expose something of significance?
Oh, you have to do like a survey, have someone monitor it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and specifically, what you do on a grant, if it's a sizable project, they say, you have to have an archaeologist lined up. So in case you need them. Now, the people who do projects really hope they don't need to use the archaeologist. But the State Historic Fund wants you to have lined somebody up in case something is found, and you have to,
Oh, yeah.
and you have to stop construction if you find something.
Now, if there's federal funding involved, it's not it's what you gotta do. It's part of the deal, so.
And it's connected to state grants, they have the same requirement.
There's actually a really interesting, you might know about it, the talk that is gonna happen at the library in a few weeks that Lisa's helping organize. That's about archaeology as part of the CDOT Floyd Hill project, because they had put a significant site. I will send that out.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. I've not heard of it.
Yeah, I'd like to come up with that, that sounds good.
I can't keep track of these.
Sure, well, I know I saw that, I got a talk because I have to attend Floyd Hill like project meetings, and so they presented on it one day, and it was very interesting, but. Anyway, I'll send out info for.
Yes, please.
So would you be proposing to, how I guess would we, are you thinking
Well,
to integrate?
I think there's sort of a question we did sort of to talk about the plan, but in what we're doing, say, whether it's the comprehensive plan being updated or whatever, we do need to sort of recognize that in the bigger context is we should be looking at the archaeology as well.
Right, yeah, because the comp plan really does not address that at all.
It's not mentioned at all, and sort of, it at least needs to be mentioned several times in the chapter that you sent all of us.
Right.
That's a skill set that's different from what this consultant provided, thinking about the archaeology.
Yeah, we have someone on
I
the,
know, yeah,
on the commission who's
right, yeah.
got a background.
So that's it, you know, an overview and how to approach that would be that would be a significant piece of work, but it would be It might be very useful for the city
Mm.
to know and have an approach instead of having a surprise in the middle of a key project. I know there are surprises that have to do with, industrial, remains and that sort of thing in this town from time to time.
But no skeletons yet,
No well,
And the, and
that we
the,
know of.
that you know of, yeah.
the other thing is that there's just a reference to, I don't know if there's any other information about it, is that there was, I think, what was called a peace trail from the plains to what is now Idaho Springs.
Springs, right.
So that the tribes that are on the plains were allowed to come up here and use the springs.
Yep.
And that was the purpose of the trail. So that would be a major find if anyone were to find anything related to the trail, or if there's any remnant of the use of the springs.
I imagine they
during the-
follow Clear Creek, so
Yeah, I mean,
they're
that's,
doing a lot of work there right now.
and so it's hard to say, okay, what might be uncovered, because there's almost no literature about it, other than there's a reference to, there was this trail.
Yeah, I always wonder what, if you knocked down the hot springs and did a full excavation archaeology project there, what you might find.
Along those lines, before we get much further in time involved, it would really be worth finding out from CDOT if they have plans of what was here before they put the highway through. So that we have a record of that, because that's not shown on the Sanborn maps either. The Sanborn maps largely stop at the river, at the creek. And so I'm assuming somewhere, and they would not likely have destroyed it, they may have lost it. There would be detailed plans and investigation into where the highway is and what was there before.
Would SHPO have that for Colorado, do you think? I know CDOT might in their archives.
I think
but
CDOT's
SHPO
most
as
likely.
well.
I think CDOT's most likely.
Kind of predated a lot of those rules, but.
Well, I do have contacts in CDOT, that I can talk about it. They would certainly not be the ones who have the answer, but,
Well, presumably they have an archaeologist as well. The archaeologist might know.
Right.
Because for example, there's very likely there's possibly buried foundations over on that side of the highway.
Yeah, because the creek used to run in the middle of town, not on the end of it.
But it was, I guess, essentially either houses or mining, because the Sanborn company didn't see a reason to map it, so they weren't worried about fires over there.
What would be the approach for a series of topics that related to the comprehensive plan? Would each of us study it? Is it a consultant job to think about the possibilities and to look what people have done in other communities? Would it be a joint meeting with the planning commission to start to get their idea of what they're wanting to do? What would be the approach?
I think sort of two pre-steps would be, number one, if we want to do something, we want to make sure city council is okay with us doing it.
right,
Because our mandate is actually very narrow
right,
in the municipal code. It basically says we have the power to review applications. There's one sentence that sort of talks about investigating buildings, but that had to do with exemptions and sort of what you do with that one sentence. So one is, okay, whatever we want to do, it probably needs to be referred to city council and say, yes, they're okay with this board doing something, whatever it is.
Is a good point. And would that be something that might be, included as an action item in the plan for consideration?
And then the second thing I would say is to come to a decision. This is more for us, but again, it has to go to city council. Are we talking about a portion of the comprehensive plan, of which there already is, and we got that in an email? Or are we talking about doing a preservation plan for the town? In other words, all these topics we're talking about do they get wrapped into a thing that is theoretically part of the plan, but it's actually a separate document?
So
Yeah.
as
As an
a
example,
sequel to this,
well, no, yeah, as an example, Georgetown has that. It's 25 years old now, but basically they said, we as a community want to be doing these things in terms of historic preservation. And
Oh, you don't?
the actual plan is only about 20 pages long, and the rest of it is, well, no, that's not true.
Okay, are you in town yet?
A lot of it is sort of research, in other words, who's the grant, who
Okay.
would provide grant,
All right, let me.
who can you get grant money from? Of all the entities in Clear Creek County, what's the relationship of them to historic preservation? So in other words, they did a lot of research into saying, and it has to do with Georgetown in particular, is they decided many years ago, this is our big thing. We're the historic town, so we're really going to figure this out. So that, everything we do is gonna be reflected back on, how does it fit the preservation plan? So I'm just raising the question, are we looking at?
Okay, so he doesn't even show you in the meeting.
I'm trying to get Lisa connected. Yeah.
So it's,
Okay, try it again.
do we wanna do something that, okay, it's integrated in the plan, or
We had.
we want that what's needed is a preservation plan?
Oh, like a separate
We
thing.
couldn't hear them, but in this case.
And
she hasn't even-
We have a very good example
She-
from Georgetown,
listening.
even though it's
But I,
25
you know,
years
like, I
old.
don't know if she.
2000. It's very well written. And there is a publication from the American Planning Association which says, this is how you write a preservation plan. So, but I think that is a question for us as to, what's our scope? And then I think the third question, which you raised at the beginning, which is, who does this? Do we do this? Does it take someone from outside to do this? Now, my feeling is we could do it, but that doesn't mean we should do it. But I think we would be capable. We had enough expertise on this commission to do something like that. It's a question of, is there the time to do it? And should we be doing it?
Right, I will say back in, when this was all written in 2017, it was largely done, by the planner at the time, Alan, and
He did a good job. That was one of his major accomplishments.
I would agree, and so obviously, if we're looking to just build off of this and do an update to this plan, which for a lot of sections is all we really need to do, that's easily done in-house by me and planning commission and the community and all of that, and we have the capacity to update a lot of this stuff internally, I think. If we were looking to do a full, like a separate preservation plan, you know, then it begs the question, how deep does it go? Who's the right person for the role? I
And
will
does
say-
that happen this year, or does that happen
Right.
just recognizing staff time,
Mhm.
not this year?
Sure, well, and we do have we don't have the funding to do an entire comprehensive plan. We have $50,000 in the budget, which if I'm doing most of it in-house, or the city, I guess, is doing most of it in-house, we will $1,000, but
And are you doing all the maps? Because usually that's the big cost.
right, and probably not all the maps, but we have all the we have all the maps from back in
Yeah.
when this was done in 2017 in like our GIS.
Mm-hmm.
So in that sense, a lot of it, some of it can certainly be updated fairly easily with my moderate level of experience doing it, but I'm definitely not an expert.
So to the bigger question as to what do we think in terms of is that something we should be trying to do this year? No, I think there's interest in saying we need to contribute to the plan and understand the process there is that we would be making a recommendation to planning commission. If council says, yes, go ahead and do this, the way the process works is that we would be making a recommendation to planning commission saying, we think you should have these things regarding historic preservation of the plan. But in the end, it's their decision. It's actually not city council's decision.
Right,
Right.
and where I would say the plan, the comprehensive plan is pretty good right now is giving a lot of background and history, but it really doesn't have any. Like the objectives are basically just, we want to promote the benefits of historic preservation and continue to protect and preserve the historic resources. And so I think we're at a point now where we can dig a lot deeper, you know, we have goals to.
And to give an example, one of the topics, whether it's in the comprehensive plan, but this would be more towards a preservation plan, for example, is where the money is. In other words, actually, that's not difficult to research because there's only about 3 sources you can go to. The federal money, it's a question, is there gonna be anything there?
Right.
The second one is the state of Colorado, which the State Historic Fund, again, has probably the best state grant program in the country. And then the third, well, in fact, we have someone who used to work for the National Trust. There are certain private organizations. Did you ever deal with the website historicfunding.com?
I don't think,
Because what it is a website that has all of the grant, it has like 10,000 grants
right,
listed.
yeah,
And
it's after my time, so
Okay.
the answer is no, I
It's-
didn't.
Yes, I see it.
It has, actually, I bought a subscription for this year to it. And what it comes down to, for things that might be available within the state of Colorado, there's 125 to 150 grant programs that they've identified. However, most of those are like City of Aurora, City of Arvada. And so when you knock that out, you get down to one or two dozen, maybe. And so, for example, of how that would be researched, you'd say, okay, someone needs to go to all those websites and see, is there something relevant to us in it? Plus there's the documentation from the State Historic Fund. All that documentation is available on the site, so it's really sort of a search and edit thing. And we'd have an implementation section on, okay, here's the money side of what's out there. And kind of, Georgetown sort of did that 25 years ago, but much less was available when they did. But that's an example of a component of a plan of how do you implement it, which is grants and tax credits, is what it comes down to.
Yeah, if the city wants to be in a position to take advantage of these umbrella kinds of programs like the rehabilitation tax credits, you've got to have properties that are set up, that are qualified, that are identified. That's, number one. There needs to be a process of hand-holding for property owners so they understand how to apply and how not to fall into the many pitfalls that there are along the way, so that they get the project actually certified and get the tax credits that they would be do if they did the work, properly, and all of those sorts of things. So that would be a real sort of full range of incentives, supports, pre-identification of cultural resources that the city thinks it would be important to preserve. All those, there are a lot of benefits from that kind of complete system. And I think a lot of the groundwork is done. There needs to be
And then there would also need to be the community engagement part.
that's exactly right to get
And
you go for it, yeah.
And I guess the question is that something in terms of the direction of the comprehensive plan, or is that sort of, okay, that really needs to be something separate from a comprehensive? See, because for example, I think Alan did a very good job on the plan, but like most plans, it's pretty general about how do you implement it.
Right.
And the example is, okay, where does the money come from? Where, for the preservation part, there's actually real specific information, in other words, that could be part of the plan.
Right.
Sort of, whether it's an appendix or not, but it's saying, okay, here's the state funding, here's the tax credits, here's the out-of-state grant programs that we would be eligible to apply for whether or not we get them. Would we get that specific in the plan?
Right, and the plan is not that specific typically in most of the sections with some exceptions, but. So then I wonder if perhaps the best way to do the. Not that we necessarily want to push off projects, but certainly. If nothing else, we should identify in the comprehensive plan, the need for a preservation plan and identify it as like a key objective for preservation element over the next. Bit of time, which maybe is not exactly what we want to do, because I do think we can get. Much more specific than we are right now in the comprehensive plan, and
And one of the things that the plan is recommending is there be a preservation plan done, and it would have these pieces to it.
right, and we could certainly, that would be very easy to do, and I think that would clearly be. That'd be something that I could, just earmark to add tomorrow and get the language in fairly easily, in addition to some other things like exploring these opportunity programs for potential neighborhood historic district and tax incentive programs and the support and the community engagement and all those things. I think that would be easy to put in, but and would not be a huge lift from this board, especially given that the scope is technically so narrow. I certainly believe that if we went to council and said HPRC is interested in getting more involved in these particular elements, I don't see why they would balk at that. But so that's certainly a step we could take. But I think you're right. The question is, do we want to get more specific in a comprehensive plan as a city, or do we want to just identify that we need to get more specific in this other plan that supports the comprehensive plan? For example, we have a downtown plan that was adopted in 2023, and that's very specific about downtown improvements here, infrastructure, and
Like the parking garage.
and all of that stuff. And we're certainly not going to add that into the comprehensive plan, but we are going to reference it.
Yeah, it's a separate document, it's the same way a preservation plan is a separate document. It is part of the plan, but it's in a separate document.
It strikes me that the benefit of having it as a separate document is that now it becomes a more dynamic document. Comprehensive plans don't get updated all that frequently because they're this big undertaking that's very broad. If we're able to do this separate plan, then if it needs to be updated, that's very specific and it's a standalone thing, which may be beneficial.
Yeah, I agree.
That makes sense. I think though, at the same time, it's worth exploring the idea of actually creating, not waiting for the plan, preservation plan to be done before beginning to investigate the feasibility of establishing a residential district here so that more properties are eligible for tax incentives for improvements.
And is the case of the reason that hasn't moved forward in terms of the first district, is it just there's competing historic demands the city has? In other words, there are other things the city wants to write grants for that relate to historic preservation. But that's why the first district has not moved forward.
It's a good question because
Because it was good, the thinking was by now there would have been a grant application for doing the first identified residential district.
I see. Well,
And other people were thinking a year ago, well, before you were here,
right.
it was being discussed about, okay, there's probably gonna be a grant application, and actually, that probably would have occurred actually last year, is what people thought when this survey was done.
Well, I would say that the lack of a grant application is not because the city is prioritizing other grant applications. It's more so that I guess simply have not made that step. And perhaps it was Well, I will certainly say that when I came on board, we did not necessarily, no one had perhaps impressed at a leadership staff level need to do that, though it has been discussed here a number of times.
Although in a different vein, asking for a grant to do that would be competing with the Springs asking for a grant, the Opera asking for a grant. I'm assuming, although maybe they're beyond this now, Argo may be seeking grants. So you can only get so many grants into your town.
Right, and there hasn't been a very good coordination, I guess, between these competing
And
groups.
I'm trying to remember her name now. Who's the project coordinator, the new project coordinator at CPI? She used to work for the National Park Service. I know her from a while back. But for example, I know one of her projects is the Springs. Cause she had, when I talked to her at the conference, she said she had just met the day before with the people who were doing the Springs.
From Colorado Preservation, right?
Yes,
Would that
and
be?
it's a very common name. There's an actress with the same name. And I know, right, it might be Carrie.
Is it Kelly?
Kelly,
Clark?
yes, Kelly Clark.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Yeah, she was, you probably know this, is that, out of Lakewood is the center for the whole country for design and construction of all National Park Service projects. And she was like, I think, an upper level manager there. And that's where I know her from. Cause they asked me to do a presentation to their staff about the standards, which was sort of funny.
Well, I definitely think, I mean, with the caveat that there are, well, Hot Springs, I think, has already applied for funding in way of,
And so has, I think, the opera.
not actually, I think so, but I don't know that they actually ever.
Cause we talked to them about their schedule in terms of the grant, and that's why I think we had a special meeting for them
Yeah,
because of their grant deadline.
right, and I don't know, I'm gonna reach out and see what the status of that is. But anyway, the other project that I know has gone for funding in the past is the project support building, the on the corner adjacent to the library, just across the street from the library, the Bishop.
Yep.
Your center, for their like veranda, second story deck and
Oh,
at one
Queen
point.
Store.
Yeah, exactly. So, but I do think it is a grant that needs to occur if that's a priority for us.
And this is in a different category, I think.
It
I mean, I think they would
seem to
call,
be.
I think they would call it a planning grant.
That's right. I think
Yeah,
that's right. It's a different pot of money, so.
So the next, I think, let's see. Do you know when the next, I'll look it up, but when the next deadline would be?
It's usually like March and September. Rian, that sounds right. But they want you to talk to them no less than 45 days before the deadline.
Right. So
Of course it is.
I think Lisa's trying to talk to her.
Lisa, were you trying to talk or did we just overhear you? Let's see. Well, anyway, I think if it's September, I certainly believe that this could be a good project to push forward with, to be ready at least for that deadline, obviously at this point.
Yeah, I think it would be too late for the spring. She is trying to say something.
Would you like an e-receipt?
I don't know if that's- That maybe
Thank you
it's.
for shopping at the Home Depot.
I'm not wired into this meeting, so that's not me, it's on my screen.
Yeah, we would certainly, I think everyone else is probably applying for actual, like the competitive general
Yeah.
grants, whereas we could, apply for a planning grant or
Right,
survey
as a
grants
CLG.
or, yeah.
And there is a different CLG grant application as well, which is usually fall.
Mhm.
I think is when you apply for CLG. They're small, like they're like $5,000, I think, for a year.
Which would obviously not be enough for,
Although it could be like a match, maybe.
right? Well, the planning grant for the State Historic Fund planning grant, non-competitive grant is only for up to 15,000. So I suppose in that sense, we probably would be in that, competitive grant.
Although it could be the kind of thing where you talk to consultants and say, what can you do for 15? Or let's say the city put in 5. So asking them how much you can get done for 20. The original survey in Telluride was actually, was it Rocky Mountain? I'm trying to remember the name of the firm that's been doing it for years, because they did a presentation at the conference. Is it Rocky Mountain?
Oh, yeah.
They did the original one, but they supervised a group of citizens to collect the information. Which I'm sure is a much cheaper way to go. If the State Historic Fund would still accept that kind of approach of saying, you could have citizen volunteers collect a portion of the needed information, and the consultant is the one who evaluates what's been collected.
Right, well, and we do have quite a robust historical society membership who I think probably would at least partially be willing to support in that project. I think we'd have enough folks who'd be interested in.
Even if it's like 2 or 3 buildings per person, that would, if it's a fairly sizable membership, that would do it.
Yeah, it can almost be done as a B, BEE, if people all sort of doing it at the same time and discovering,
Right.
previous owners and all that stuff related to genealogical research, that's good, all that stuff can be, it can be a fun activity, and it builds support for the concept that there's building specific history of which the present owner is a part of this continuum.
Right,
Or just one person does the building department records and another person does the assessor records, and sort of divide it up that way.
One person census too,
Yeah,
that's us all free.
yeah, in terms of just
Fine.
dividing up the work that way instead of by building by different research topic.
And these districts, an initial district, it would depend on a combination of things, perceived threat or pressure, and, the likelihood of change, physical change, that sources of potential support within the district from property owners, I would think. That might determine what sort of boundary you would want to, and how the people in town think about the particular neighborhoods. I mean, Grass Valley's thought it was different from somewhere else on the other end of town, right? So,
Is there a realtor involved with Historical Society?
it's a good question.
Because that would be someone in terms of asking about, okay, where do you think things are gonna happen in terms of people buying property?
I know you remember. Compared to the other.
Whenever they put it for sale.
yeah, they're all interested, but the historic property goes for sale.
So are we saying this is one thing we wanna try and do this year is further getting a residential district, at least investigated, grant application, and maybe researched? In other words, one of the things that we could do is some of that research or with the Historical Society. So there's a starting point for the consultant if a grant is gotten. So are we identifying this as something we want to work on this year?
I think so.
Yeah, that'd be good.
I would think so. It's local historic district designation or local landmark designation is the second most powerful means of community preservation. The first is the sympathetic property owner, understanding property owner with deep pockets. That's sort of the top. After that, the local historic district designation is, that's a good, strong statement of community support for keeping the heritage going and keeping it to provide a good economic base, a good place to live in the future, you know, raise family, whatever age, all of those things. So those, I would put that as a high priority, most bang for the buck.
And the other one you already touched on was the threatened property.
Yeah.
Are there properties that are potentially threatened?
Yeah.
But I just sort of sense.
Can
that
I
people-
interject for just a moment?
Sure, we can hear
So
you.
one of the things I definitely want to say, I love the idea of making sure that we have the 2-block buffer. I think that can solve a lot of our challenges. But the challenges that I see when I talk to people, because for those of you that have been on the commission for a while, you know one of my goals is to basically get most of the town into some kind of historic district, preferably local, so that we can adjust. You know, East End has different needs than, say, the West End of Colorado. But one of the concerns that I see is that people see historic district, doesn't matter which kind, and they think, oh God, it's going to cost more. We're going to have to, as far as doing that front end education, help people figure out how they will finance any kind of upgrades or renovation in a way that is not prohibitive to them. Because that's, when I talk to people around town, that's one of the things that I hear is, oh, I'd love to, but it is so expensive.
Yeah, and I think when the consultant did that survey, that was like one of the top 3 that we as a commission said, the community engagement was one of the top 3 things that needed to be done.
I think, Lisa, I think that's an excellent point. That is the basis. That's one of the practical basis for the fear, is that it's gonna cost too much.
If we cannot show people ways that they can do this without it costing more than just, you know, whatever renovation they were going to do in the first place, they are not going to be behind this. I do think that people, you know, they love our town. They love like the historic houses. I hear a lot of people, some of our noisier grumblers in town do not want to see the town change. One of the reasons that we tightened up the design guidelines was because we saw people who did not have a connected history with the town or a love for the town that were wanting to, as Dylan so aptly put it, make the building work for what they wanted rather than work around the building. But within the people who are here in town, the big thing that I hear is cost. And my other concern is, given the federal funding situation as it looks now and sort of the outlook that I see in our current administration, I am concerned we're not going to be able to tell people, how can you do this in a more cost-effective manner.
Yeah, that's.
And I think that's one of the things that's gonna be worthwhile to research that historic funding site. It's like that, they make it very easy for you to identify, you basically have filters to get down to it. And I mean, it's certainly something I can do since I have the subscription of saying, I'm guessing it's gonna be 1 or 2 dozen at most, and this is a site, they say they have 10,000 grants they have identified in the entire country. And like I said, I think from using the filters, I'm guessing at most 1 or 2 dozen are going to apply to Colorado. And that's not gonna be too difficult to go to each of those sites and see, is there actually money there or not? And what is the money for?
Well, that would, my recommendation would be that as part of a preservation plan, that there is developing a toolkit of not only funding sources, but also smart ways to go about doing the rehabilitation work, cost-effective ways to help property owners just figure out, what to do with the foundation, how to approach a roof issue, what do you do when the siding needs to be replaced on the building, how do you start, how do you think about it, how do you keep the cost down, how do you do it in an appropriate way? And that would be a wonderful resource if that can be developed.
And one of the things that's been done in ADUs, this hasn't been really done in preservation this far, is they've gone to saying, these things are pre-approved. In other words, like Denver has recently said, here, if your neighborhood adopts ADUs, here are the standards that already have been written, so you don't have to worry about that type of thing. There's other places that have gone further and said they've developed actual plans or drawings and saying, that's more along the lines of how to do this and to make that as easy as possible. But it's a matter of how much help can you give to someone if they want to do it, and sort of understand you could do it this way that wouldn't cost you any more money than what you were going to do anyway.
I think that's actually a great idea. I also love Mike's idea of a pamphlet or a handout about here are some ways that you can maintain historical integrity, but also, and we've talked about this a little bit, but we haven't moved forward on it. Are there local tradespeople who do this kind of work? Are there people who work locally? Because what I have found in working with a lot of local trades folks is that they really have a great deal of pride in this community, and they're excited and happy to work with people in the community who are wanting to maintain the community. And I think if we could develop a list of those, not, us endorsing anyone, just here are the people that we know that work, with the historic preservation guidelines.
That's a good, excellent suggestion, and getting those people who are usually buddies and often competitors, but to share the information, and some people who've solved problems that might be common in town here, to find what's the best preservation way to do this, what's a clever way, and maybe that could be encouraged also. Maybe there's a way to set that up.
And a lot of the things that we're talking about, the materials exist somewhere else. And it's a matter of taking them and editing them for Idaho Springs.
So that was one of the questions that I had thought of at the conference was, does the library or the planning office, is there a library of preservation how-to? Are all the preservation briefs, for example, available in the library? Or
I'm guessing probably not.
so that's a low cost, no cost information source if the library would be interested. All this APT stuff, very, very good. All of the preservation briefs that National Park Service puts out for how to qualify for tax credits. Lots of very good guidance. Be it something where your office and the building department can just say, hey, go down the library and we can, it's free, but if you want to see it here in town, there it is.
And the other place of doing that is on the city's website. And I'm sort of thinking, I think Libby, as head of the district, I think she's fairly receptive to things being donated to the library. But I don't know how much web space, a lot of this is making it available for half the population, is putting it on a website. And just go there and you can download the information you need. The other half is the people who don't use the internet a lot. And that's where it's gotta be a place, and that's probably the library.
Yeah, and the material's free. Somebody just gotta pull it together.
Yeah. It would be, even if we just had it on hand here, it would be a relatively easy.
That's true, there could be
project
stuff in
where
the
I
list, yeah.
Yeah.
print all of the preservation
Yeah,
briefs
yeah.
and get them into a
Yeah,
binder.
binder. Yeah, did you know? And at some point, the local newspaper does a story about this great resource that's available. And, did you know that you could, people have figured out how to do this, so.
The thing is that there actually are hundreds of documents. Because there's also the National Register of Bulletins, and then there are the technical briefs. Those are the three main ones, but there are other ones besides those. And those together are probably, and then there's the interpretations. Those together, those four things together are probably 200 to 300 documents that are about 4 pages long.
Right. So
And
like
then
we have a couple of-
there are probably a half a dozen books that patrons could check out, take home and, read in front of in their drafty living rooms to, to see, what's,
Slanted, not necessarily drowned.
but anyway, if the library doesn't have a good resource, that might be a good, good way to.
Right.
Is
I
the
think
library,
oh,
go ahead.
pardon me. Oh, I said, I think the library, because I work with Libby elsewhere, and I think Libby would be delighted if if we worked with the library to create a section on how to improve your home, even if it's old and, unique. But the other thing that I would say, I know because I've been working with Mike now for a couple of years, and I look at some of these documents that you reference, Mike, and I am less intimidated by them. But I think one of our goals should be to help demystify architectural terms or the terms that people let themselves be intimidated by as far as home renovation. So maybe we start to create a library where top 10, what are your top 10 projects that we see here in Idaho Springs? What are the top 10 building permits? And then if you need more, you can talk to the librarians, or you can look at our library where we've collated and, curated all of this for you, so that, I really think we have to make, even though the access is there, I think we have to make the access even easier, because I think a lot of the technical papers, even if they're not that technical, are intimidating to people. I know, I'm only speaking from experience and a couple of old houses.
Yeah, and and kind of in terms of the approach to it is the books that Home Depot used to sell. Because basically their books, like in other words, if you got a kitchen book, it was written for the perspective of, you're a homeowner, what is it about if you want to renovate your kitchen? And it sort of takes you through everything, materials, figuring out a plan, that type of stuff. It's done to that sort of very basic level of, okay, this is how you actually wind up doing it.
It would be really easy for us to create this document. We could bind it, print it, and sell it for $10, at the library or at City Hall or whatever. And it would be an Idaho Springs specific document. Here are our recommendations for best practices. Not that this is going to work for everyone's home, because everyone's home is uniquely unique, but we could make this an Idaho Springs book.
Things to think about when you're starting to think about what you do with your house here, what's next. Yeah.
Exactly.
So I now have 7 or 8 things on my list, which is good, but I don't know if we want to maybe prioritize.
Yeah, we probably need to do that.
Because, obviously.
So I think number one, we do want to ask City Council, we'd like to make recommendations to Planning Commission about the plan. I think no matter what, we want to do that, because the better it is in the comprehensive plan, the better chances it'll be followed.
Agreed. Well, and I'm trying, it's a good point that I didn't really think of the need to get council's, I guess, approval, because the other thing that I thought would be really helpful for me would be, we now have this board that's about business and community promotions. They seem like an obvious choice to help with economic development and tourism, because that's kind of everything they look at. Whether they're as potentially willing to help with the comprehensive plan is another story, but it seems like an obvious intersection that we can work on. Similar to this, so I think as part of my presentation to Planning Commission and then Council, which will be right at the beginning of March, I'll need to incorporate kind of this ask, if you will.
I think that idea of making sure that preservation is with part of the thinking of boards like that are working, and a library, that this is a very historic city, And we're proud of it, we're keeping it, and this is what we're gonna do to keep it, and everything is working in that direction. All the economic development wants to take advantage of that and promote it and so on. So I think that would be good part of both the comprehensive plan and then a lot of conversations with these other boards, so.
And I think maybe number two, what I would suggest is to look at the buffer zone. Because that's sort of an easy one, because it's already in the code, it's just ill-defined.
Right, agreed. And it seems like the sort of thing that we, as a city, just kind of came up with, right? Like, it's not a requirement to have a buffer around a historic district. So we certainly have the opportunity to expand on that. And that's something that I think is a relatively easy project compared to like creation of preservation plan or Home Depot style, like best management practice documents, so. But will be something that will have a big positive impact, so I can certainly start working on that one as well. That would be a good work session topic. I think obviously some of these things, if we don't think we can get to them, this year, we can also write into the comprehensive plan as objectives for the next few years. I think that would be pretty appropriate, just so that they're not lost and now cemented them as priorities.
And as something near term, I'd say, suggest as a third thing, is to look into what would be required for a grant application for a residential district. In other words, when we read the literature, are there things that need to be done before we can even apply for a grant?
Well, I love the idea of archaeologist. And if not, obviously we probably can't afford to pay for it, but at least one who is sort of in the hopper, so to speak, where they would be willing to work with us. Despite what I see as far as the administration's interest in expanding, the whole history, we do have a very diverse history. Unfortunately, a lot of it got wiped out in, was it the 40s? Is that when the Klan came through, 40s and 50s? We had a very strong Klan influence here, and they wiped out a lot of the records and the note of our diverse populations, but you can see it, not only can you see it in the Underhill Museum, because James Underhill worked with a lot of Asian students who were the children of the original miners here, but you can see it in the cemeteries up in Silver Plume. I mean, those cemeteries are separated by, ethnicity and location and region. So I think figuring out how do we forge a relationship with an archaeologist that we could work with would be really important.
The other thing, does anyone know the archivist?
Christine?
At the county.
Oh, yeah, that's Christine, although she just got cut.
Oh, okay. Because that would be a major source in terms of having all the archival records of the county, like newspaper stories and so forth.
So maybe Christine's not, she's the library archivist, isn't she? Christine Bradley?
Oh, I also did.
I think Christine, she used to be the county archivist.
There's someone who works with the clerk, the county clerk.
Okay, so that must be new, but Christine Bradley works with the library now part-time,
Mhm.
and she has been collecting like the old newspapers and the old current, and like, she has been bringing, all the chicks home to the nest.
Mhm.
And that, I know the county archivist just got cut,
Okay.
not cut, but like her hours or their hours were cut.
Dylan, can I ask you to go back to the notes that, like you had the second point, the first was that coordinating with council and making sure that we're.
The second is well,
There was the second,
Oh,
Like the
like
buffer zone.
clarifying the two.
no, define the buffer, yep, thank you, yep.
Because that when I was listening to, I'm like, oh, the buffer is actually bigger than my mental picture of it.
Mhm.
Anticipates it
It's-
screaming
it
when we
would-
talk about the buffer.
Well, it's more than double the size of the historic district.
Anticipate screaming. The people are gonna be like, what? I don't wanna be in a buffer. And they don't wanna be in a
But
buffer.
they're already in it.
Well, they're already in it, but they don't wanna be in it until their next door neighbor decides to build a hotel and then they're furious, so, you know, like,
I only had, when I was working here, I only had to deal with one applicant, and that worked out well. Because they were open to the idea of, when I showed them stone would look a lot better, and wouldn't cost more, they were quite happy with that.
I think a good example of a project in the buffer that maybe is not the best project for other reasons, but is good from integrating well with the community was the Gem Motel in some ways. Because I think they did attempt to match styles in some way,
I think you're giving that
like
one,
as far as
that
materials.
stretching is doing a lot of work.
But I will say, like, it's fair, but.
But they were keeping that old, the small house on the, on,
Right, on the 15th.
on
Street
15th,
side.
yeah.
So just to add another topic or another question, in terms of the membership of this review commission, it's 5 plus alternates, is that right, generally?
Right, so we don't have any alternates.
Alternates presently.
We just now have a full board.
Yeah, we haven't had a full board for almost a year.
I know, I had a thought about that, and that is whether there might be either an Eagle Scout or a Girl Scout doing a senior Girl Scout project, or somebody, a strong social studies student from the high school, who might want to be willing to serve as a sort of training and, you know, sort of development as a civic participant, but also to be an additional point of energy.
We actually had a college student for about half a year. And she's going to law school, so that's why she resigned.
To decide to go to law school.
I did hear, and we got an email about a week ago from the school district. Who apparently, one of the teachers.
Tatina?
Students in her geography class are working to solve so it's not 100%, but they're like doing a United Nations Sustainable Development sort of goal. And they're working on trying to figure out local projects, like community garden beautification sort of projects. But I'm wondering if we could somehow roll that into
Interesting. That elementary,
high school.
No, it's high
high
school.
school?
Tina's a great teacher partner too.
Yeah, and I think there's, with the geography classes, things like, maybe imagine, but it seems like there's maybe, I've thought of a few projects that could work in town for these students, but I'm wondering if there would be a preservation project.
Yeah, I mean, it's just in terms of the, you know, gathering some of the research, there's that, there's also looking at, you know, the newspaper records, the census records, looking at the different kinds of ethnic communities that have had a presence here
That
over
would
the
be a
years.
great project for them.
There's, yeah, a lot of good stuff there. But there could also be, if there's a particular, I don't know, you know, particularly strong student who likes civic sports, you know, that kind of thing, and would be willing to serve. I don't know what the requirements are for service on this commission as
Well,
as
the
an
three of
alternative.
you pretty much hit all of our educational requirements, because we do have educational requirements, but those are met. So we have some flexibility with our,
And I will say, it says members shall preferably be qualified by training or experience, or shall have exhibited a strong interest in historic preservation by membership in a group concerned with historic preservation or other overt expressions of such interest.
That'd be me.
It would seem,
Great.
that'd be me
it
too.
would seem reasonable, given the current makeup of the board, to say, well, if there's a college student or a high school student who's really interested in getting more experience and wants to dig in on some of these topics, I think we
Right.
certainly want to take them.
I think too, we should definitely talk to the library about building our database and gathering some of our research. Christine Bradley does a lot. She's really invested in the Devil's Gate Historical Society. But because she's the librarian's archivist, she can also help us, you know, like with where to go and how to find things.
Speaking of Devil's Gate, where is that project, the library talk?
Oh, so it's called,
Oh, yeah.
hold the door, I will tell you. So it's basically Devil's Gate, 2 months ago, did a project about the archaeological finds that they found in the Floyd Hill project. As they're redoing Floyd Hill, because you know they're tearing up the whole side of Floyd Hill. They are a centennial archaeological company. And some of my board members at the library saw it and said, oh my God, we need this for our annual meeting. So it's Wednesday, the 26th at 6 p.m. You have to put up with about 15-20 minutes of library
Like
business.
tomorrow?
No, March 26th.
Oh.
No, not tomorrow, sorry. It's March 26th. There's a little bit of library business, but other than that, it's the talk. And the members, the board that saw this talk said, I would totally see this again. The two gentlemen that did the talk, you know, they're both archaeologists. They've had a wonderful, you know, like the ripple effect. People just loved it.
What I think would be to connect would be to contact the University of Colorado and see if there is a graduate student where there might be a thesis type of project, or just someone who has, as part of one of their elective classes, being on the board and
Yeah,
participating in all that.
I was thinking that, I think that.
Because there's an actual historic preservation program as a distinct program now at the University of
There
Colorado.
is the Dana Crawford Historic Preservation Program, it's called one of the, Steve Turner runs that program. He used to head the State Historical Society, and then, and one of his guys who teaches there is somebody who used to work for me at the National Trust. He's a lifer, he's still there after 25 years or something, but, I'd be happy to look into that and just see
That'd be
what the
great.
possibilities are. Because I'm looking for an excuse to have lunch with those guys. And see for breakfast or something. All right.
There, for a graduate student, there would potentially be a very good project here to do, including some of the things we've talked about.
Yeah.
In terms of would make a good graduate project.
Well, one thing, and what I want to circle back around to when we talk about talking to the Business Promotion and Vitality Board. One of the things that I have noticed in dealing with our building owners downtown is that they're happy to do things as long as it doesn't really negatively impact their expenses and their bottom line. And so I think, and there are some pretty big movers and shakers on that board who are building owners downtown, as you're well, we're all aware.
Tommy Knocker's one of them.
Tommy Knockers, Bojo's, Mary Jane owns a number of buildings downtown. There's like, if you're going to cost them money, they're going to dig their heels in. So we have to find, and I don't believe in the city giving them money because I just don't, but we're gonna have to find ways to make it. Because my concern is that in the progress of moving forward, we lose some of the historic character. We saw that last year, with the Opera House, and I don't think that that's a one-off anymore. I think we're gonna see more of that. So if we can find ways to make historic preservation look attractive and appealing from a business standpoint, because most of the people that own our historic buildings are either business owners or they rent to business owners.
And that would be one of the things to look at in the NAPC and community messaging guide as to what are they recommending. And again, I mentioned it's actually a 2-volume thing, which is the idea, which was written around, okay, you want to create a historic district, how do you do it? And it's written, again, from a very political perspective. In other words, we're advocates, we want to accomplish this, how do we do it?
I'd like to read that because I would love to, well, I'm not joking when I'd like to see the whole town in a local historic district.
And that's how Telluride started out. It designated the whole, it's continually shrunk over the decades.
Well, no, but I'd like to do a couple, like, I think East End is its own historic district, and Central Idaho Springs to like 13th is like maybe 19th to 13th or 23rd to 13th. That's a different, because that's a mix of residential and business. And then you go 13th and West, and that's much more residential. Like, we have very distinctive districts in the town.
And there's almost an East Virginia and a West Virginia
Yes.
in terms of neighborhood character.
Well,
You've got, East is very tight. Whereas you go west, you begin to have more of a yard.
yes, but you know what? I heard what you were saying about all those little, I love those little houses on Virginia. Like, I love all those little tinies that are tucked back in right up against the mountain. You know, I think, I love the idea that we could create that and then write the historic district guidelines for what that area needs.
And then there's almost a quarter mile going up Virginia Canyon where you have houses as well.
And those are actually all probably pre-1900.
And that's where you have-
most of them are.
And that's where you have that one very long stone wall.
Yes.
When it becomes the smart thing to do to take advantage of the historic preservation tax credits, and you'd be crazy if you didn't do it. You know, as part of your rehab project, you left money on the table. When people start thinking that way, that's, you know, when.
And that's what we
you
have to, like,
support.
I've spent a couple of years now where when I talk about it, I'm like, there's like historic district tax credits, like, and the town helps you, like, we have to approve you so that you can apply for those. Like,
And we're still at the scale where that tax credit makes a difference. Telluride got to the point where it wasn't big enough in terms of the size of projects people were doing, but we're still at that scale where if it's $50,000, that's a lot of money.
that's a lot, and we're not gonna, honest to God, I mean, you guys know, we're not gonna, these houses are not going to expand. There is no room for most of these houses to expand.
Other than upwards.
But even upwards, people don't wanna see more than 3 story, like, that's a
No.
very clear line in this town.
Well, and I just mean like a lot of the houses are not pushing up to 35 feet, so if someone wanted to pop the top, they probably could on a lot of these houses, which we don't necessarily want. But
The foundations.
But which
That'd be the question.
the zoning kind of permits, encourages.
Well, you're
Because
allowed.
you've got to go to get
35
more
feet.
housing and we want more square footage in housing and that's the way to do it.
Yeah,
So
the thing that I think is really interesting, which is kind of off topic, but now we have a zoning requirement that if you build a single family home, it has to be at least 850 square feet, which is not big, but
But a lot
it's
of our
funny that,
A lot of our single family homes don't.
sure, and so then today you'd have to get a variance in order to build it, which is.
They're around, a lot are gonna be around 500, 600 square feet.
I see a lot of 2 bedrooms, like 2 1s that are 650 to 700
A
square
lot,
feet.
a lot of the houses started out as one bedroom. You had living room, kitchen, bath,
In the bedroom,
one bedroom. And then many added a second bedroom later on.
when they can afford it.
So anyway, it's kind of funny that we have this requirement now.
A lot of places do have that requirement of saying, you
Yeah.
don't want houses that are too small.
I'd be willing on council to entertain like a 600 square feet because we just don't have the acreage to support.
Right, the thing that's really interesting is we allow ADUs to be at 200 square feet. Which is very.
But
small.
our ADUs are very, like, I have an ADU and the people who had the house before me had to get a variance. They need a variance. They went to planning commission and got rezoned for this, like, I don't know what was going on there.
Sure, well, Sure.
Because we do not have a square, like a clear cut ADU regulation.
right, well, and that is something I think that's having to work on eventually, that's a.
And honestly, I think we have to, I mean, it's not our purview, but we're gonna have to like put up with tiny houses. I know people don't want to. But
200 square feet is.
is a tiny house.
I think, though, if you have to pay new tap fees for a tiny home.
Yeah, that's-
Do it, and that's.
that as much as-
Council.
The tap fee and the parking are gonna be the two big impediments on ADUs.
Yeah, and those are two things that I think broadly, historically speaking, council has not liked to budget on too much, so. Anyway.
Even though you actually could, even though that the water service to the house is adequate to serve it, the city does have good reasons why they don't want that to happen, because they need to tap the money. For the
Yeah,
plan.
for plan investment.
Well, even the parking now, like if you look at parking. People say, oh, there's not enough residential parking, and I'm gonna disagree, having lived in a couple of areas of town. There is enough residential parking, you just have to be thoughtful about it. If you go west, where there are more like there's longer lots, like the lots may not be wide, but they're long, that's how I have an ADU. There's room to fit parking in there.
Yeah, if you're willing to give up your lawn, or, I mean, there is street parking also, I think, on the west end especially.
Yeah,
And that's kind of what is happening nationally, is cities are beginning to count on street parking. That's that's a somewhat controversial item, but that is what is happening, is places beginning to say, okay, we'll count the on-street parking.
It's certainly controversial in a place where the transit is
Not great.
quite.
Well, this is not our.
Controversial with my wife. I
So
can tell you
can I
that.
interrupt?
Our
It's after
neighbor.
8 o'clock
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and I'm totally out of steam. So,
I think we are, I was going to stop this at 8 and then Lucy became so fired up.
Well, I've been
he
listening.
does that kind of thing.
Yeah, I
Oh.
just couldn't, I
Well,
couldn't
thank
slow
you-
it down,
thank you for,
but
like,
I don't, I think,
Not pouring water on my flame.
I certainly have good direction. I think there's a lot that we can work on and perhaps we say, I don't know if we'll have any regular meeting items next month, but maybe we want to.
One takeaway I have is to see about UCB's historic preservation program, whether there's any interest in anybody down there to find a capstone project to work up here on something, so you can see about that. I'll also look into the list of, if there were 10 titles, 10 books, how-to books, really practical for residential owners to keep their buildings, historic buildings up, buildings of this vintage, what would those books be? And I'll see if I can figure that out. We could find a way at the library to make sure they have.
Oh, they would, I think the library would get them, but I would also like to, look at, I love Mike's idea of a pamphlet that helps people, because I think our website is much more friendly.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
and-
I need to work on it still.
Except you gotta put the new design guidelines on there.
They are.
Oh, I just looked at them on Monday. They're not.
Okay, Mike, are you gonna adjourn us?
I can adjourn whenever ready. If we continue discussing, though, we shouldn't adjourn.
But we're
I
just a
can
work
hush up.
session.
I can hush up,
Okay, are we ready to adjourn?
I think. So.
And you've got enough to go on?
Absolutely.
And you want the information regarding community engagement?
Well, community engagement and based on like the best books for how to take care of your historic home, what are our top building permits that we see people wanting to work on? Like outside of, maybe even like, you know, heating and air conditioning and stuff like that, because we all have funky monkey.
I'm sure my impression when I was here for about a year and a half was that it's mostly commercial buildings is what most of the building permits are, which might suggest there's residential things that are happening without permits.
Oh, yeah, there
Oh,
are.
for sure.
In Idaho Springs.
So-
I would definitely say the number one anecdotally, I can look into it, it's an easy thing to look into. Anecdotally, it's probably decks are the most common building permit, which is just because.
And porches.
You know, and Dex is one of those issues about what's your preservation approach? Some people think that decks are, oh my God, they destroy the way the property looks. Other people say, put the deck on, the next person takes the deck off. You know,
Sure.
and it says it really, done anything to the historic building and historic character. It's one of those things to decide.
Yes, decks and windows.
Windows,
Yeah,
Yeah,
foundations.
windows.
Another
And
Okay.
windows are always controversial.
Yeah. Well, I can shush now.
Okay, so meeting's adjourned.
Thank you, Mike. Thanks for running the meeting.